Hi there. Welcome back to Reel Film Chronicles. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian. And today we are going to be talking about perhaps one of the most anticipated films of the past few years, Denis Villeneuve's 2021 Dune. Man, this movie was a big one in the making. And I'm just going to head right into the overview from Letterboxd, a couple of the actors, etc. And then I got some questions about this film and the Dune universe. Paul Atreides, a brilliant and gifted young man born into a great destiny beyond his understanding, must travel to the most dangerous planet in the universe to ensure the future of his family and his people. As malevolent forces explode into conflict over the planet's exclusive supply of the most precious resource in existence, a commodity capable of unlocking humanity's greatest potential, only those who can conquer their fear will survive. Dune. It's all about the spice, right? I'm just going to give some context. I don't really know much about the Dune world. I've seen the 1984 David Lynch Dune film.
Okay.
I started reading the book a few months ago in anticipation of this, but I really did not get very far, not from any fault of the book being too crazy or anything. I just did not have much time to spend reading, which always makes me a little sad. But have you read Dune? How familiar are you with the Dune universe?
Well, I think, first of all, in response to your earlier comment, I believe it's called the Dune-iverse.
The Dune-iverse, okay.
No,
I'm learning already.
No, I don't know. I'm pretty sure I didn't make that up. I'm pretty sure somebody out there has already said that, but for our purposes, we'll call it the Dune-iverse. But so
That's fair.
Yeah. Also, in anticipation of the movie, I have never seen the 1984 version that David Lynch directed.
Oh, really?
I'm gonna maybe cause some conflict here. I'm not a huge Lynch fan, so
get out.
So I've seen his thing here and there. I will say one of the scariest scenes ever is from Mulholland Drive. This is yeah, and you know exactly the scene I'm talking about. Just mentioning that, it's like I know it's coming and it still gets me. But I never saw that. I know I had a friend growing up and he was super into the Dune books and he read them all. Kept trying to convince me. Finally, with Denis Villeneuve, who's a director that is one of my favorite directors. I have a section for him in my collection carved out specifically for his films. So his version, I knew he was directing this Dune coming up. And so I specifically sat down and started reading through the book. So I got through the first two. So that's Dune, and then Dune Messiah. And I'm halfway through the third one, which is Children of Dune. So I'm right now I'm pretty deep in the mythology and the lore. So, but actually reading the book and because it's one of those things, right, where people Dune's got such a hardcore fan following.
Yeah. It's an institution, right?
It is. And to step into that is well, how can this be as good as all the hype, right? So you have to, you're in that position of managing expectations. But when I actually sat down and read Dune, it's a super slow burn, but I was kind of blown away by how intricate the universe was and the world was, the depth of the themes that the book was exploring, and just how riveted I was by even there's not a whole lot of action that's constantly happening, but it's just people having conversations and all this character growth and all this background. A lot of it is almost it feels like Lord of the Rings, where Fellowship of the Ring feels like a lot of almost world building and setting up so that the next two kind of books can happen. And a lot of Dune felt like that. The original book Dune, I think it's something crazy 200 something thousand words. It's an epic book. But a lot of the book is
a beefy book.
Yeah. It's it's building up and world building and slow world so that when an action beat does happen, all the you understand the characters acting this way and it makes sense and it's such a huge payoff. So I was a Dune convert, and so I was really, really stoked, having been a recent Dune convert, just in the past year, to be able to see I finally understood what people were saying. This is an unfilmable novel. This book is so difficult to adapt, and I can see why, and that's why I was so excited for Denis Villeneuve, who is an amazing storyteller, amazing director to take this book and see what he could do with it on screen. So I was going into this with huge expectations.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, you talk about the books and this book, the first, and we're really just talking about the first book, right? Being unfilmable. And I think it's interesting to see the history of Hollywood's attempt to film it. The book was published in 1965, and by the 70s, there's lots of interest in adapting this thing. So I'm just basically reading off Wikipedia and a couple of items here. And I'm probably going to get the name wrong. Alejandro Jodorowsky tried to adapt it into a 14-hour project, which would probably be like a nice epic TV series.
Yeah.
And that fell apart. And I think there was a documentary about that process released maybe 8 or 9 years ago. That's I keep seeing more and more about it. Like, I need to go check this thing out. And that led into David Lynch's Dune, 1984. And then there was like quite a bit cut out of that. I think it's telling me it was a 3-hour film that was cut to 137 minutes. And I cannot picture, like, based on the film I just watched here, 137-minute cut that cover the entire book seems preposterous.
Yeah, I mean, just to put into context, Denis Villeneuve's film, which is listed as Dune Part 1, and we know about this in the background and seeing like all the development of this movie, that Denis Villeneuve, once he actually sat down and started, like, I guess, working through the story and seeing how epic it was, like, he realized he couldn't tell like the story of the first Dune novel in one single movie. And so, like, the first movie ends up being, I think it's like 2.5 hours, roughly 2 hours and 35 minutes or something. And it essentially covers like the first third of the first book. It doesn't get as far, I don't want to get into spoilers too much because, and especially like you haven't read the book yet, where he stopped it was kind of a natural breaking point, but there is like later on in the book, there's a breaking point that I thought was going to make more sense to stop it at. But as he was going through and like just how much he was putting on screen, and even, how much he was putting on screen and how much of the story he was telling. Yeah. It's going to take 2 or 3 movies just to tell the story of the first book, let alone, the story. I think once we get into it, like the story of Dune Messiah really ties in to Dune and Dune Messiah, I think would make sense to make that like a trilogy of movies if you're going to make a trilogy of movies.
So was the first movie here, like what we got, really a lot of that kind of slow build up introduction into the Dune-iverse, so to speak? Because I assume there's a lot of that going, like you said earlier, a lot of that going on in the books. Was this basically set up for like a really explosive, again, without spoiling the book, I haven't read it, without spoiling the second half of the book, like, is it going to explode into a pretty big, like, lots of payoff in the part 2 of this?
Huge. I think one of the criticisms I've seen circulating online is this feels like part of a story or half of a story. It feels like unfinished, and where it ended, and I will give that criticism. It does feel kind of abrupt. But I think once we see like the second movie and hopefully at least the third movie, and if Villeneuve gets his trilogy of Dune movies, essentially this could be his Dark Knight trilogy. Essentially, I think if he's allowed to do this, and it looks like the second movie for sure is greenlit now.
Well, I think this is just going to be 2 movies,
and even if it's just the 2 movies, this could, like, I don't want to put too much pressure on Monsieur Villeneuve, but like this could be as game changing as the Dark Knight then.
Like, what I would like to see is the adaptation of the first book by Villeneuve. And I know there's a whole series of books and a universe afterwards. I want to see other directors take that on. I want to see the story continue.
It would be nice if, ideally, if Denis Villeneuve finished up the first book with second movie, and if he was allowed to, in some miracle, adapt Dune Messiah as the third movie in that trilogy, I think it would stand the test of time as one of the all-time great trilogies.
Here's the thing. I don't want Villeneuve to get stuck doing Dune movies for the next 10 years. Like, he's done so many good things. Like, we could list some of his filmography, but a sci-fi kick in the past few years, like Arrival and Blade Runner, obviously, like, I need to see more of those movies. I don't want to get sidetracked into this this
Well,
whole
that's
Dune
why I
world,
think it's
right?
like, yeah, if he does a trilogy and just caps it the trilogy, I think I'll be happy. Just like with Nolan, is like, I love that he's like, he did the Dark Knight trilogy, capped it at the 3 movies, and said, "Is like, no, I'm gonna go do and go do some other stuff,
Yeah.
my own projects, some things that I'm passionate about." So I think it's like, I don't want Denis Villeneuve to be the next, like, was it Kevin Feige? I don't know how to say his name. I always feel bad because I feel like I'm mispronouncing his name, but I'm not doing it on purpose. But the guy who runs
Fair enough.
Kevin Feige, is that how you say it?
Yeah, let's go with that.
The guy who's essentially the godfather of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want Denis Villeneuve to be in that role. There'd be Zack Snyder, who was kind of running the DCE. I don't want him to get locked down because he's such an amazing storyteller. I want him to be able to tell all these different stories that he's been telling. But to see, but also part of me now is greedy, is like seeing what he's been able to do with the first Dune movie, and just knowing the story, to be able to see that on the big screen. I'm greedy. I want to see that Dune trilogy now, at least the trilogy, because like Children of Dune is getting weirder, and from what I would try not to spoil books and stories for myself, but like it sounds like there's some really wacky stuff as the books go on that you have to be really invested in for it to kind of make sense.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm definitely going to continue reading the first Dune book. And I mean, when I went to the bookstore and bought this book I was looking for, there's a huge Dune section in anticipation of this movie. This is going to definitely pick up a lot of fans for this franchise. It almost seems inevitable that we're going to get another 15 years of Dune movies and adaptations. I mean, I'm even reading Wikipedia here, and there was something about kind of a prequel series coming out before this, but I think it was all shelved. It's like they know they have a big hit on their hands before it even hits the screen.
Well, that's the thing, because I think Frank Herbert wrote, I think it was 7 books total originally. 6 or 7 books, and then his son Brian Herbert kind of took on. He kept writing more books. So like, there's kind of like almost like the main series, but then like the scope of the timeline in this universe is like tens of thousands of years. So I think, and I could be wrong on that. So like, if there are any Dune fans out there, feel free to correct me. But I think Brian Herbert kind of some of his books he was writing actually went back and filled in some of that, like, 10,000 year or 30,000 year history of like all the stuff that they were talking about in Dune, and some of the stuff that led up to this. So there's like the Dune books that Frank Herbert wrote are one thing, but then there's also like the universe is just massive. Like, you look at the Dune universe and the way they describe things, it's such a massive scale that things are on in terms of time, in terms of people, in terms of space. It is an epic story in every sense of the word.
Well, it almost sounds like you could draw some parallels to Lord of the Rings with a bunch of additional books around Lord of the Rings, all the quote appendices.
Yeah.
Just like the lore around it, the world building. There's so much of it out there. There's a ton of it for Dune here. And I think it's also partly to credit Lord of the Rings for paving the way for something like this Dune movie to hit the screen, knowing that's going to be done in multiple parts, because they definitely proved before that we can't film this in one go. I mean, I think there was a TV series, like a sci-fi series 20 years ago that was a little more successful, but again, it's a nice TV show that can at least adapt a bunch of the material. And now in today's Hollywood, probably episodes past have complained about the corporatization of these movies and everything, but we've had the benefit of Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Marvel to set up multiple movies with one giant story arc, and these movies can function on their own. And it's like, now is the time that we can actually adapt Dune. Not only can we faithfully adapt it, probably with all the special effects and everything, because the sky's the limit at this point, but people and audiences are willing to wait for multiple parts, knowing multiple movies are coming down the road. And it lets these creative filmmakers do what they do best. It's just a really exciting time, and it was almost like the perfect storm to get Dune on screen in 2020. Well, 2021.
2021. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned Lord of the Rings, because like a lot of the criticisms about Dune feeling like a part 1, I think you could level those same criticisms at Fellowship of the Ring, where it really it feels if
Yeah.
you go back, it feels like not a lot happens in Fellowship of the Ring. It's a lot of setting up the story for the future big
Well,
events, right?
here's the thing, and I heard this on another podcast, so I won't take credit for this idea. But the first Lord of the Rings, we all went to see this movie in the theater. We knew at that time that there are two more movies coming. We knew that there was two more parts. Like we knew we were watching part one of a story. Where here, for some reason, I think maybe it's the marketing was kind of leading us to believe that based on the success of this first part, we'll see if we get a second part. And these movies were not filmed back to back or anything. Like they're filming Dune 2, part 2, a year from now. That's when filming starts. It's not going to be 2023 or possibly even later until we see a second one. But I think that can affect our interpretation. That can affect our viewing and enjoyment, knowing that this is coming to an end. It's kind of like The Matrix 2 and 3. We knew they were filmed back to back. When The Matrix ended on kind of a weird note, well, we know literally in that case 6 months later we're getting the second part of that two-parter.
Right. So I think you're getting into kind of like the dialogue around the film, which was there's some drama between Denis Villeneuve and the studios. Mm-hmm. So what I'd heard was one theory was that the whole threat about like, oh, we're only going to make part 2, or I think it was because it's through, is it Warner Brothers?
Yep, that's right.
It's Warner Brothers, and they've been really like, I don't know, they keep wanting to shoot themselves in the foot. Like the whole deal with Zack Snyder and the Snyder cut, and with Denis Villeneuve, and I think with Nolan they were feuding with him too. Mm-hmm. But I think like somebody was saying is like probably a negotiation tactic that they had planned to make part 2 all along. Yeah. But it was like a negotiation tactic with Villeneuve to put that out in the public consciousness. So it sucks that all that kind of backdoor studio politics kind of carried over and potentially hampered some people's enjoyment of the film. Because I think the way that Denis Villeneuve was talking, I don't think there was any doubt that people initially that there was going to be a series. It was all that stuff with Warner Brothers and like putting pressure, like negotiation tactics, like a lot of the stuff like where you see like people like where that thing with Natasha Romanoff, I was going to call her, but
Scarlett Johansson,
like publicly you put stuff out there publicly where she was like in like the salary negotiations with Disney, or saying like she was owed this money that they promised her. You put it out in the public sphere and it gives you leverage in negotiation. So I think that kind of bled over obviously into the perception of this film. But I think like from the get-go, like, it was called Dune Part 1 in the title card. It was always envisioned as multiple movies, and it was just that studio politics that skewed that perception, right?
Yeah, well, it's like one of two things. Basically, I'm looking at Wikipedia quotes from Denis back in 2019, and he's basically saying, I never would have agreed to do this if it wasn't going to get two parts to it. It's like, oh, back then we knew that was going to be like that. And then you realize the corporate side of it and the advertising and everything. In every trailer, there was no part 1 listed, or it's just like, they seeded that idea that there's not a part 2 greenlit here yet, right? But
and it was all
that's the unfortunate thing. The other part of it is like you said, almost like butting heads with the creative talent and all these directors. I think spurred by the pandemic and Warner Brothers kind of struggling as a corporation to find a new way to get their content out there, and they went streaming. And I think that's an important thing to note here, is that this movie was released in theaters and on home video platforms, or a home streaming platform through HBO Max at the same time, which would negatively affect the box office numbers, which we get to see in the public, and we don't get to see viewing numbers on HBO Max except what is fed to us. And I always take that with a grain of salt. So it's like there's definitely some conflict there. Yeah, thinking this movie would have done $700 million if it would only open in theaters in a normal year, but it gets pushed back a year. It was released in theaters in October, and the pandemic is still an ongoing thing. It's still making money, but it's a completely different landscape now, right? Yeah. And to be fair, you and I both watched this at home on the comfort of our own living room setups to watch this film. I did not have a chance to go out and see this in the theater.
So the one thing I am glad of, though, is that they didn't go the Disney route, and they didn't turn this into like a series. Because I think this story, an epic story like this, it needs that medium of movies. And I think as epic as a TV show is, telling it in that serialized format, I think would have done a disservice to the material. So I'm really, really glad that this wasn't like changed at the last minute to a limited series, but they actually went with the full motion picture. Because getting into the discussion of the actual movie now, this movie, I think one of the consistent things that people have said is that this movie looks gorgeous. It was shot gorgeously and it looks amazing. And even on a small screen, and I think small for us is like 55 to 65 inches, which to our 12-year-old selves would be like, that looks like a movie screen.
Yeah, well, exactly.
But like even sitting in at home, like just the way that the shots were composed, just that opening shot of the desert and the way the sand was like flying at the camera and the sun and like the light was glinting off the sand. I was like, I just got chills. Just like this shot of the desert. It's like, it was, I don't know what it is. I'm not a cinematographer. I can't really articulate sometimes why a shot looks amazing, but the way this movie was shot, it was just like every shot was gorgeous. And every shot, I love Denis Villeneuve's pacing of movies where it's so deliberate. I won't say slow, because I was like a couple hours into this movie and I was like, it felt like it flew by. It felt like a Nolan film where they both have that gift of like telling these incredibly detailed long stories, but never making it feel long or weighted. And just the way he shoots his scenes, like it just like, it feels like, I don't know if it's like luxurious is the word, but it feels like it gives you time to take in everything in that shot.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You get as a viewer, the camera lingers long enough. It enjoys the moment and it allows you to breathe it all in. It allows you to soak every detail in. It's like if the scene was too fast, I would only see a part of it. But if it lingers a bit, it lets me admire its beauty. My eyes can go all over the screen and absorb every little detail. And I think that goes a long way towards setting up this thing and allowing us later on to be fully immersed into the world that these characters and these stories are going on in, right?
Well, I think part of it's the editing, right? We have to give a credit to the editing
For
too.
sure.
But partially what you're saying too is like, like the way Denis Villeneuve shoots a film, I feel like I'm pulled into that world. Especially as a fan of the books, seeing it translated onto the big screen, I was really blown away. Because here's the thing: is like for me, reading the book before the movie is always potentially a double-edged sword. I've had it go
definitely
both ways. Where Gone Girl, I think it was, where I read the book ahead of time, and then I watched the movie, and it was just like, oh, I wish I would seen the movie first. And then Fight Club, I watched the movie first and then read the book, and I was glad I did it that way. And Dune was such a double-edged. It's always a double-edged sword because like you have things pictured in your mind of how this should be, and also you have a knowledge like, oh, here's all the things that happen. But for a movie they have to cut some stuff, right? You can't put everything in from a book into a movie. It doesn't translate across different media. So I was like, I was really stoked to see how some of the stuff was portrayed. And I was like, so disappointed because like there were some other kind of key things that I wish had been in the movie that obviously thinking on it, was like, it was cut obviously for pacing issues. But yeah, it's always a double-edged sword with reading the book and watching the movie and having that comparison and having those two kind of competing visions in your head, right?
You're talking about some of those opening shots of it, like the movie opens up with some text to sort of describe what is going on in this universe, right? And they're talking about the spice that is like only available on this one planet. What's the planet name again?
Well, the planet's name is Arrakis, but it's commonly known as Dune.
And those shots you're talking about, like the spice is kind of like this red, almost like it's kind of like this glittery thing in the orange sand. You're looking at these scenes, you're like, what am I seeing? It's like my brain is processing this. It's like, I think I can see the spice. It's right there on the surface for the taking. It's like, it glitters. The place is gorgeous. But let's talk about the movie.
Okay.
We're going to put all spoilers on the forefront here. Full spoiler warning. Talk about anything you want here. Yeah, man, where do you even start with something like this? I mean, we've been talking about how beautiful the movie is. Does what's in your mind translate onto the screen. Like I'm thinking about the structures here, these imposing angles of these the interiors and things. There's just like, that was mind blowing. Was all that stuff like in the book? Did that meet your expectations?
Yeah, a lot of it, I'm gonna say exceeded my expectations, because a lot of it was on a much grander scale than I was imagining. I tend to imagine things a lot more kind of maybe on an intimate level or closed in, but like you see how things are described is like, that makes so much more sense. I'm talking about like the locations and some of the ships. They talk about the scale of the ships, or they talk about the scale.
The ships, yeah. We got to talk about those ships.
They talk about the scale of the sandworms, and it's like they talk about, it's like, oh yeah, they can be like, 400 meters long, and they could be like, 20 meters across or whatever. It's like you try to visualize that, but to see it in proportion and have like the next to the human beings, or like you have the banana for scale, and all of a sudden you get a true sense of like how big these things are. Because in your mind is like, yeah, you understand is like 400 meters by long by like whatever it is, 60 meters across or whatever he describes it.
Well,
It's like,
I thought that first scene where we're basically first introduced to a sandworm played out so beautifully, where our protagonists are going out. They're kind of on like a little flyby. They want to check out the desert. They're basically doing a tour of the spice operation with one of these giant machines that, I mean, without a sense of scale, you don't really know how big this is, but expertly they go down. There's a sandworm on its way. There's people on the mining ship, like the land crawler thing, and they got to get them out of there, right? Because the pickup device is not working properly. So they actually land beside it, and then we have these shots of our characters like standing next to the giant treads on this thing. You're like, this is a machine that is absolutely dwarfs anything we have in our own reality right now. Like, there's my sense of scale. And then just a few moments later, this sandworm is opening up the earth and swallowing this thing whole. And you're like, okay, this sandworm is gigantic. And it's such a beautiful representation, like a escalation of scale that is really easy to digest and understand.
Yeah. And so that's the thing too, is like, you got to think of the scale of this universe, is that there's this one planet that produces this spice. And I think they talk about it in the movie where they need it for navigators to be able to.
They say it allows interstellar travel.
So yeah, so what it does, I think they mentioned this in the movie too. It's one of those things where it's like if you aren't paying attention, you'll miss that. But it's like specifically the navigators, and in later books it describes why it's important. But in order to actually conceptualize like and navigate through space, they need the spice to enhance their cognitive abilities. So that's why it's essential for travel. In this world, there are trillions and trillions of people on dozens of worlds, right? And they're all being fed spice from this one planet. Yeah. So it's like, you got to think is like the production has got to be, everything in this universe is just on this massive scale. But yeah, so starting at maybe we'll start at the beginning where the Atreides family. So it's really the big story here is about the two kind of big houses or large families. And if you look at the Dune universe, it's kind of like, it's very a feudal society, and they go and explain why that is. They actually, I guess there was a large war, the Butlerian Jihad, I think it was. You have to go, it'll come up in the books.
Yeah.
Anyway,
fair enough.
But there's a ban on essentially any artificial intelligence, but there's also a large distrust of technology in general, or technology that gets too complex. So that's why you see in the Dune universe, it's very kind of feudal. It's almost like medieval meets sci-fi kind of aesthetic.
Well, this is one of the things I want to bring up, is that everyone seemed to be fighting with swords all the time.
Yeah.
It's just like, where are the laser guns and stuff, right?
So one of the things, and you see that one of the laser guns, they're called laser guns. You see one of the, a couple times actually in the fights there, right? Where it's like super powerful. So they didn't touch on it in this movie, but one of the things was, and this is one of the great things about the book, is it's or the world and how balanced it is. So people have those shields, right? You think it's like, oh, well, I'm just going to put on my personal shield and it'll protect me from everything. It's like, well, no, there's a couple limitations, right? Like, it protects against a lot of stuff, but also one of the things in the book it explains is that if you have a shield, and if you have a laser gun blast that hits a shield, it causes a nuclear explosion or an atomic explosion. So it's like, you can have a shield up, but as soon as somebody shoots a laser gun at it, boom, right? Everything goes boom. Yeah. So like it kind of cancels out. It's like, you can use a laser gun, but you have to be pretty darn sure if you're in close quarters that You don't want to. You don't want to use a laser gun unless you absolutely have to, because somebody could be wearing a shield and it could glance off them, and all of a sudden you got a nuclear explosion in your
Everyone's
face.
nuked.
So there's a little like kind of balances in technology, but I love that too. Where like in the ornithopters, for example, you see like all the like the physical switches instead of computer screens.
Yeah.
But that's why, because in that universe, they don't trust computers, and they only allow technology to get to a certain point, right? Where they don't have advanced AI. And that's why they need that spice, because everything is navigated by people. I said people, the navigators, you find out later, are not, they've been kind of mutated by the spice. So then I don't know, people's human, I don't know if they'd be considered human genetically, but it's the navigators are actually, it's all done by individual, like by sentient beings as opposed to computers, right?
I mean, I'm not sure. I certainly didn't pick up on that in the movie, but I did pick up, and they obviously let you know full well that the spice affects people, and obviously the Fremen, people who are native of Dune, have their glowing blue eyes, right? It's just like, oh, this spice will affect people. It's just to what degree, I'm not 100% sure.
Do you want me to spoil a little bit for you? I don't know how spoilery you want to get, because you haven't read the books yet at all.
I haven't read the books. I mean, all I have knowledge of is this first part of the two movies here.
Essentially, I won't get too into depth to it, Brian, because I don't want to ruin your experience. But spice is super addictive. So essentially, the entire galaxy, to some degree, is addicted to spice.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it does give, and it also grants other abilities. I won't get into it here. It helps extend life. It helps people cognitively enhance them to obviously navigate incredibly complex paths through the galaxy, to planet. Has other effects as well, but essentially, it comes up in, I don't know if it's in Dune itself or in later novels. Essentially, everybody uses spice. Essentially, like functionally, their entire galaxy is addicted to spice in some way. So, like, if you turned off spice production, you'd have people going through withdrawal, and you'd have mass death from people who were just addicted. After a while, you get so addicted you literally can't live without it.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, but anyway, going back to like that first scene, the story about like House Atreides and House Harkonnen. So the Atreides are kind of the quote unquote good guys, and the Harkonnens are quote unquote bad guys.
Yeah.
But so it starts off with Duke Leto Atreides, the leader of House Atreides. He gets essentially gifted a new fiefdom, which is he gets control of Dune, right? And it's like, for some, it's like, oh, it's a big honor, but he's trepidatious, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, like you're in charge of spice production for the entire galaxy.
That's a pretty big responsibility, and that's a huge target on his rule and everything. I imagine people are warring for this. The movie kind of tells us that there's an emperor, but it's like there's still battles between the different houses, and it's like, how much power does the emperor have?
Well,
it's not really fully explained in the movie, and I'm fine with that. It's just like, it's just really interesting what happens here. And I mean, the Harkonnens they look evil. Everything about them is evil, but man, they were so compelling on screen. I just got to shout out a couple of actors here. Right? I mean, you're talking about Duke Leto, that's Oscar Isaac.
Yeah, amazing.
His son, Timothy Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson. I don't know if she is his wife, but
so Lady Jessica is actually his concubine.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's again,
but she
it's
is
complex.
the mother of I think his name is just named Paul in the movie.
Yeah, Paul Atreides.
Paul Atreides. Yeah, so she's the mother of Paul Atreides. I mean, she's a concubine. Fine. We've got Jason Momoa, Stellan Skarsgård, Zendaya in here, Josh Brolin, Javier Bardem.
Oh yeah.
Dave Bautista as a Harkonnen as well, and man, they all did fantastic. Everything about all the acting, all that stuff, fantastic. But please go on.
Wait, did you mention James Brolin?
I threw out his name there, but yeah. And obviously, there's a huge cast here that I'm missing out on.
He was great, but yeah, the whole setup is like, he's like, oh, it's like on the surface, it looks like this big honor where like the House Atreides has been, because right now House Atreides is ruling Caladan, and it's like, oh, like it's a big honor. You get to rule, you get to go and essentially you take care of Dune for us. But it's like, it's really obvious from the get-go in the movie, and Denis Villeneuve does a really good job of setting this up. It's like, no, it's like the Emperor obviously has ulterior motives for sending House Atreides there, where House Atreides is a threat to his power. You make a lot of money selling spice. You can become like the Harkonnens are like renowned for like their wealth. as well as like their brutality. But it's like it's also incredibly dangerous. The Fremen are incredibly dangerous. The weather there. You have like I think in the movie they mentioned like the storms like 800-kilometer-an-hour winds.
Yeah, the storms are gonna wipe you out. I think was it the night cycle is freezing temperatures.
Yeah,
like everything.
the
This
sandworms
planet is
there.
working against you.
You can't walk
The
out there.
sandworms, yeah.
They'll swallow you up. And then you have like the Harkonnens, and the Emperor kind of plotting in the background. Essentially, it was setting them up to in this position where they were going to fail. With like you saw like when they went to Dune and like all the spice harvesting machinery and the storage machinery is like all old and outdated and essentially sabotaged by the Harkonnens. But it's setting up this kind of epic battle between these families and really focusing in on it's smart in the movie and the book where it focuses mostly on the journey of Paul Atreides, who I don't think it's specified in the movie, but in the book, I think he was 15 around the time that the story started.
Yeah, he was pretty young.
He starts off talking about him having these dreams. And so having these dreams specifically of Dune, but specifically of this one young woman. And it starts off with his journey kind of starts off in the movie where he wants to go to Dune, I think ahead of time. It was like he had all this military training and combat training, and he wants to go to Duncan, Idaho, played by Jason Momoa.
Yeah.
Duncan, Idaho is like the sword master of House Atreides, but he's been sent as an advance guard to go and like scout out Dune and see what their enemies are and like make contact with the Fremen ahead of time. And Paul wants to go with him, and his dad Leto is like, man, you're too important to the House Atreides. Like, I don't want to do this, man. I just want to live my life, bro. And his dad is like, you know what? I was the same way. I wanted to be a pilot when I was young. I didn't want to lead the house. I didn't want to be involved in this politics. Was like, you know what? Just stay with me, give it time. And, you know, if you answer the call to be the leader of this house, to be a leader of men and women, it's like, that's fine too. But it's like, if you don't, I'm still going to love you. You're still my son, but just give it a chance. And I thought like that was really touching. There's a bunch of really touching moments in this movie.
Yeah, there were some really important scenes and threads with Paul and his relationship with his father, but also maybe more so is Paul and the relationship with his mother.
Yeah.
Which was just really nice to see like these different family dynamics at play here and the relationship, because there's more going on there, but maybe you can explain his mother's heritage here and his.
One of the cool things that I was really wondering how they were going to do was the voice. And they mentioned this several times throughout. Because in the book, they use the voice. And so going back, so Lady Jessica is a Bene Gesserit. So the Bene Gesserit are kind of like, they're essentially this universe's Jedi. I know I'm going to make people mad saying that because Star Wars came afterwards and they were undoubtedly influenced by Dune. I mean, you see like the Jedi mind trick where you can make people do what you say. The voice is one of the things that the Bene Gesserit can do. It's one of the main powers that they have. And you see that the Bene Gesserit is a sisterhood, so it's all women. And so at the beginning, when the Reverend Mother comes, one of the Reverend Mothers of the Bene Gesserit order comes, and she's angry that Lady Jessica has been teaching her son the Bene Gesserit ways, like the voice. There are reasons later on where she mentions the Kwisatz Haderach, which is like their chosen one, which is essentially like the Bene Gesserit. Another thing they do is they've been trying to like, you know, specifically manipulate things from behind the scenes and cross genetic lines to eventually create their chosen one genetically through all these lines. But anyway, so the whole scene between him and his mom, and then he goes to visit the Reverend Mother and the Gom Jabbar test, where he has to stick his hand in that box. And all the box does is like it causes intense pain. It goes through your nerve ending. It explains in the book, I think, where it's like essentially just like it tells your brain that your hand is essentially like just on fire and melting off.
Yeah, it's just like he puts his hand in the box as causing an intense pain in his hand, but there's no physical damage happening. It's almost like a mind trick, right?
Yeah.
But it's like legit sending pain through your nerves.
Oh yeah, it feels like real pain. And since she has the poison needle to his neck.
She's got a poison needle, like right, like half an inch away from his neck. It's just like, you pull your hand out of the box, this needle's going into your neck, you're done.
Yep.
Scary.
Yeah, because in the books, they make a distinction. The Bene Gesserit make a distinction between people and humans. So humans are like, you know, essentially self-actualized people, or I think they describe it here. They use the line too. It's like, are you an animal or are you a human? It's like, well, what's the difference? Like, well, an animal will chew its own limb off if it's caught in a trap to escape.
Yeah.
But it didn't say in the movie, but in the book they say she says something along the lines of, but a human will stay in the trap and wait for the trapper to come and then kill the trapper so that he can't kill anybody. He can't trap any other humans, right? He can't kill anybody else. So it's really cool.
I got to ask you something here. I don't know if this is way off base of what's covered in the movie or maybe this bigger Dune-iverse stuff, but it introduces the movie as taking place in the year 10,191, right? And I am under the impression that this is literally like 8,000 years in our future.
It's our
like
future.
You and I's future.
Yes.
And it's just like, these people are humans, like evolved humans. Like our history has happened in this world.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of like, I don't know. Like in Star Wars, it's so ambiguous. It's a galaxy far, far away and it's long time ago or whatever, right? It's just like, it doesn't matter where that is. But this one is grounded in there. I mean, and then you have Duncan, Idaho. It's just like this word Idaho for the old state. It must still exist in some form. It's just like,
yeah, I don't think it's in the milk. I don't think it's like in our solar system, but it's definitely set in our world.
Yeah.
But you look at, I don't think it came up in this, but there was like, they have like the OC Bible. I think it's like the Orange Catholic Bible. So it essentially takes like Christianity's teachings and then adds some other things in there as it's gone through, partially due to Bene Gesserit influence over the years. So yeah, this is taking place essentially in our world, but just like far in the future. So you can see those, obviously see the influence of, there's a lot of Islamic or Middle Eastern words and terminology that was like Frank Herbert took that influence a lot, and it's really obvious in some of the terminology and some of the, obviously the depictions of the Fremen and some of the clothing they wear as well, very inspired by kind of Middle Eastern and Islamic culture. So that's not unintentional. That's specifically because it came out of, it's meant to be in essentially our world in the future, I think.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So Paul is basically having these visions of these dreams, and I can't remember if the movie establishes that like some of the dreams he's had come true later on, but it's like it's definitely inferred throughout the movie that these visions will come true at some point.
So first of all, when Paul's doing the Gom Jabbar, he passes, by the way. He manages to keep his hand in there and take the pain. But outside, when Lady Jessica, was it Rebecca Ferguson, and she's reciting the Litany of Fear, or the Litany to Fear, which is like a prominent recurring kind of saying in the books, like, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I didn't think that I was that invested in the books. I didn't realize how big a fan I was, but when she started saying that, I literally got chills. I got that, like, that kind of shiver down your spine. Is like, she was saying the word and like those, it was so, I'm getting chills just thinking about it right now. I was like, it was so cool. And like hearing her and her performance as Lady Jessica, like, I gotta say, like, I imagine in the books that she was a lot more stern, and and Rebecca Ferguson played the character a lot more human, a lot more approachable, a lot more likable than I found her to be in the books, a bit more cold and calculating and a bit more emotionally removed. But so it was really interesting seeing that portrayal. Obviously in the books, she really cares about her son, but to see Rebecca Ferguson really sell that and to really humanize Jessica, where in the books, I wasn't really rooting for Jessica that much, but in this one, I felt the emotional connection. I was like, okay, I can empathize with her now, or I can sympathize with her now. That was really good. But yeah, so after that, when they actually, what was the next thing? I think you would ask me something else, or you'd mention something else in the story. But I wanted to mention the Litany to Fear, because that was like, for Dune fans, hearing the Litany to Fear or Litany of Fear, like on the big screen, and hear them utter those words, like that was a big moment.
I don't remember if I had another question about it, but it's like basically progressing down there. It's like they get down to, Dune, and you sort of get this introduction to this planet and all its operations, and they basically get down into this like armored city, so to speak. It's like their base of operations that's supposed to be well fortified.
Arrakis. Arrakis, which is like the capital of Arrakis.
It was pretty wild. I mean, you get to see some of the scale of the ships that they're traveling in, and like they're landing down. You get introduction into their ornithopters, which is like, why are they using normal helicopter type of technology that we're used to? But it's like, it looked cool.
The ornithopters, I was really curious about how they would depict them on screen, because in the descriptions in the books, it's left kind of ambiguous where they describe them and they describe them like they have wings and they take, and like the wings are like, it's talking about them moving and like they'll pull them in or they'll extend them. But to show them like actually in the movie and interpret them almost as like dragonflies, where like they had like the flapping, they were like flapping really fast and that's how they got lift off. But then they actually used them as wings to glide at one point. I was like, that was really neat to how they incorporate that into a technology that like, it was familiar enough that it made sense, but it was alien enough or it was like really interesting to watch on screen. It was something different that we hadn't seen before. Because I was always picturing it almost like the Quinjets in the Avengers. We had like the almost repulsor or like the spinning blades and the
it's
wings
almost
or something.
like that's just too standard of sci-fi at this point, right? It's just like, no, let's go this route. And I love it. I mean, I loved the design of all those really ornithopters and all these other ships. It was really cool.
You were talking about Paul having the dreams. That's what it was.
Oh yeah, he was having the visions.
So yeah, it was interesting that you mentioned that some of them seemed to come true and some of them didn't, right? So you remember he kept seeing his own death at various points, even with that spoiler. He had a one-on-one fight with somebody later on, and in some of his visions, he was actually like being trained by that individual. Some of them, that individual killed him, and in the story, he ended up actually killing that individual. So,
did we see these visions in the movie, or is this?
No, it's in the movie.
I got to rewatch the movie.
Yeah,
because it's just like I had a feeling there's going to be a lot of little items like that.
What is his name? Jarvis. The dude's name is essentially the first man that Paul ever kills, and essentially it was an important episode in the book and in the movie, setting Paul on a certain path. But it's interesting because as he goes along, Paul does have visions. He's able to see the future, but he's able to see all possibilities. So so it gets more fully explained later in the book, and it'll be more explained fully in the next movie, I imagine. But Paul sees multiple different outcomes. But he also, so he sees like as he's doing things, he sees like, oh, this is the timeline we're on. But he also it describes it way better in the book. Obviously, I'm not doing it justice, but he sees multiple possibilities and multiple outcomes for things, right? So he sees like, oh yeah, and he talks about seeing his own death multiple times, where he's kind of cursed that way. Where it's like he's seeing the future is like kind of a gift and kind of a curse. Mostly a curse in this one because it's. I don't want to get too far ahead. I don't want to spoil stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's just like I don't think I really picked up on the fact that he was seeing multiple possible futures, because it's like, well, is there any stakes here for our main character? It's like obviously he's going to be in a second movie and everything, but it's like in the way the movie ends with him on this one-on-one knife fight, it's like there's no risk of this guy dying in this fight. It's like we know the outcome of this thing. Maybe he gets scratched a couple times. I don't know, but it was like it didn't feel like there were any stakes.
In all his visions, he was either being killed by somebody, or he had been friends with him and then somebody else killed him. So I think in one vision it was Chaney who killed him. In one vision it was like his mother. So it was like he's seeing all these different possibilities. So yeah, go back and watch it. But the man he ends up winning that fight against and killing, if you look at his previous visions, he had seen himself die at his hand instead.
Okay. Yeah, this definitely, I mean, for sure would benefit from multiple rewatches. I just wasn't sure for myself if I wanted to wait until just before the second movie launches to rewatch it, or
this is the thing. It's even with so much cut out of the movie from the book, there's still so much going on. It's such a deeply layered and deeply rich narrative and world that Frank Herbert created, that there's still so much to watch and so much going on. I think like this is one of those movies that like it'll benefit so much going back and watching it again. You're going to pick up on so many little things, especially if you haven't read all the books. You're going to pick up on so many of these different little things and all these different little kind of multiple levels of this movie and meaning going on.
We got to talk about Stellan Skarsgård as the Baron of House Harkonnen, and like how disgusting this guy was, but how compelling he was. I couldn't take my eyes off of every second he was on screen. It was just so gnarly, but he is so, I don't know, he just imposes, he leaks that villain quality. Like it was just really good. Like, how do you feel? What do you think about this situation here?
Yeah. So his full name too is, I think it's Vladimir Harkonnen.
Of course.
Vladimir is such an awesome villain name. I don't think there's any heroes named Vladimir. You got to like Vlad the Impaler. Like Vladimir is, if your name Vladimir as a kid, is like you pretty much got to become a villain.
Yeah, your destiny is basically set for you at that point, right? And Dave Bautista plays his nephew, right?
Raban, I think it's Raban.
Yeah,
I don't know if you pronounce it Raban or Raban. I think it's Raban. I was actually listening. There's a YouTube channel that actually goes through the pronunciations as Frank Herbert had intended of all the different names. So I think in the movie they call her Channy, which is what I called her in my head, but I think Frank Herbert had intended her to be called Chaney. Was the pronunciation?
Well, this is the thing with reading these books, and I remember reading some of the Harry Potter books and whatnot, and especially Lord of the Rings 25 years ago. It was just like I have completely different pronunciations of these names.
Like Hermione?
In my head. Hermione or something. It was just I could never remember, but man, yeah, some of these names, especially when I started reading Dune, I was just like, oh man, I'm not going to be able to keep track of all these names. This is difficult.
I had to look up a pronunciation guide. But yeah, going back to Stellan Skarsgård. So A, Stellan Skarsgård is an amazing actor. B, the Baron Harkonnen, as described in the books, he's an incredibly obese man to the point where he needs, like you saw it in the movies, I thought it was really well done, how it had these like those red lights on his spine. But essentially they were devices, I can't remember the name of them, but they were like anti-gravity devices because he was so big that he couldn't carry his own weight around. So he needed these anti-gravity devices essentially to carry his extra weight and girth around. So that's why he was like floating around, because he literally,
that's why he could float. That was so weird.
He was literally, he was so big and so obese. I mean, it was specifically, as a visual representation of the Harkonnens' excess, right? It was all, Harkonnens are all about excess and about excess of power, excess of money. But yeah, he was like this big fat guy, big, very obese man. And he needed those repulsor technology just to help him. He couldn't walk around under his own power essentially. But in the movie, it was kind of neat where he's like, got this very, like you said, like this kind of otherworldly or even like supernatural or kind of even ghostly presence. It was like unsettling, right?
Because he's the only character that will like, he kind of gets up from his seat and he floats up like 10 feet in the air and he just glides towards you. It's just like he's the only character who's floating around this world. It's just like, what? Like this guy's got some power or something, right? Like he was really imposing out there.
Oh yeah.
So these guys, the Harkonnens, basically work with the Atreides doctor, like their house doctor, I guess.
Dr. Yue.
To kind of sabotage and get into the city by killing, not fully killing, like he tranquilizes the Duke.
Yeah. So there's a conspiracy between the Emperor. Well, essentially the Emperor wants to keep his distance and not get his hands dirty. So the Emperor's troops, the Sardaukar, I'm probably mispronouncing that. So you see when Duke sends his Mentat to get those troops. So those are the actual Emperor's troops. So the Emperor is like secretly conspiring with the Harkonnens, and the Harkonnens secretly conspiring with Dr. Yue, who's the doctor, the head doctor on Leto's staff, essentially all conspiring against House Atreides. Yeah.
Which was also kind of this odd thing where the doctor is working for the Baron, House Harkonnen, to do this because they took his wife. It's just like, we're going to make sure your wife is fine if you deliver us the Duke, right? And of course, these are villains like through and through. It's just like they had no intention of doing that. They basically kill the doctor as soon as the task is done. But it's interesting to see because we kind of see the shield technology before the Duke is out there. Sorry, not the Duke. It's
Paul?
Duke Treat. Or no, the father.
Oh yeah, Duke Atreides. Yeah, Leto Atreides. Yeah.
Yeah. So Duke Leto is like investigating like a body on the floor in his own building here, and is basically puts a shield up and gets like hit in the back with. It just looks like a little like mosquito like bug, right? And it's basically drilling into a shield, and the shield is like flashing red. It's pretty neat, and it's like he eventually does get through the shield and kind of like paralyzes him. And I think it's neat talking about these shields here. They have shields on the big scale, and of course that leads into this massive action scene where they bombard the city. You see these missiles like coming down onto these buildings that are protected by the shield, but the missile will get through the shield, explode. The building is exploding, but the shield is still up, and like the explosion is like contained within this thing, and then the whole shield assembly fails, and then boom, we get these huge explosions. It was just like, oh, this is just a really neat representation. This is kind of the innovative stuff I want to see on screen.
Yeah,
it's just like, oh, these aren't just like the I'm so used to seeing these regular force fields, the Marvel shields like around Wakanda.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, we could just eventually get through this. But it's like, no, these shields like felt like tactile and like they felt like they had some weight to them or something, because they're kind of like bending to this little bug, like this little
because I think
tranquilizer dart.
I think the way it works is like if you have like a sudden hit, like it'll bounce off. But if you have like you get in and you get like a little bit more like constant pressure, you'll be able to put. You can punch through. So that the shield. So it's like we're talking about shields. Like I don't think we explained it. It was like actual personal shields where you have like a force field like surrounding your body, just your body. But they're not perfect, right? I like that they're like, it offers protection, but it's not perfect protection, right? So it's like, if you for like quick hits and stuff, it's gonna deflect shields, and for like if you're sparring, it's gonna be good. But if to get through them, like you get your sword up there and you keep pushing, and you'll get through eventually, right? So it's not perfect. But just like with the explosion, but it was kind of like, it was neat. It wasn't what we've seen before, where it's like, either there's a shield or there's not a shield, right? It's like, big explosions hit the shield and it comes down. But this one was like, no, it was like interacting with its environment almost, right? It was really, it's a neat take on the force field idea.
And I like that the force field, this personal shield, evolved further, where basically the doctor is just like, well, I'm going to give you like this little CIA tooth capsule. It's just like, you crack this and like this super poisonous gas is going to come out and it's going to kill everyone around you. So this is your chance to kill the Duke. It's like, I'm sorry I had to sell you out to get my wife, but it is what it is.
It's a chance for the Duke to kill the Baron. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, for the Duke to kill the Baron. Oh my goodness. So, and he does this later on. He's just like the Baron is like hovering over this guy, and the Duke cracks this thing, says something, and then you just see this gas like just explode all over the room, and you see the Baron's shield like going nuts, like it's going glowing red, it's doing this stuff. And the movie doesn't make it clear if the Baron survives this or not. And be like, well, we've seen these little darts go through the shield with enough. We've seen missiles go through. We've seen the shield protect against this and that. It's just like, I really liked that mystery of, does this gas get through the shield or not? Because obviously people got to breathe and the shield's letting oxygen in, right? It's just like, I love the tech. I love the tech in this movie.
Yeah, to be fair, I think movie Leto got closer to killing the Baron than the book Leto did. They were in the same kind of situation. I don't think like in the book, I don't think he had to recover in his healing tank. Whereas like,
he was in a big vat of goo. That was
it was kind of neat when the book in the movie it was like, that gas was like partially got through, so he was partially affected, so he had to go and get healed up. So, but in the books, I think the shield, I don't know if it was a personal shield or if he had a shield just kind of up around him he puts up the shield just in time, just to save himself. But also,
so wild.
Talking about Dr. Yue, I really wish they had done a bit more talking about the Imperial doctors in this, because in the books it's made more clear. Where like there's a big deal made about how did they overcome the programming of the Imperial doctors, because like anybody, and that's what the symbol, like the diamond symbol on his forehead, all the doctors who were trained in the Imperium have that symbol. It wasn't just him specifically.
Oh, really?
But they're like, specifically, they're cognitively kind of programmed to do no harm against people and a couple other things. So like there's a big thing made about like, like the programming of the doctors, we can trust Yue, right? Because after the attempt on Paul Atreides' life, at one point, like the hunter killer, the little machine goes in, tries to kill Paul while he's sleeping. And it's like, well, we got to investigate everybody. And it's like, we can't. Dr. Yue is automatically eliminated as a suspect, because nobody could possibly overcome the programming, the Imperial programming of the doctors. So it was a bigger thing. It's almost like
a brainwashing for these doctors. Is that right?
Essentially,
kind of indoctrinated.
Yeah. So like it was a bigger thing I wish they would have made a bigger thing in the movie so like it's like, this is a crazy thing that the doctor, not just because he was of his own, he was being manipulated by the Harkonnens, but he was also like had all this kind of cognitive programming into him that they had to overcome somehow. It was like it was a big deal in the book that they were able to manipulate him, right?
Huh. That's wild. Yeah, but it was just like, come on, doctor, like you knew they were just going to kill your wife regardless. It's like, how could you sell out like this?
Yeah.
But it was what it was.
But it was kind of cool too, talking about the tech, where like the shields, it was like an in-universe reason why you'd want to use swords as opposed to projectiles and firearms, because like you could shoot, but everything would be deflected, but to get up close to the sword, and then you could push your way through the shields, and then it made all the sword fighting kind of more. And it was also like they were kind of like not technophobic in the future. They obviously have the big ships and they have the shields and everything, but anything to do with any kind of artificial intelligence or like they had the people in the Dune universe have a hard time trusting technology at all.
Well, I kind of wish that the movie did a little bit of a job
Yeah.
conveying that to me, who has no idea what's going on, really. This is my introduction to it. Or maybe I just missed it. I mean, there's probably a lot of subtleties happening throughout this film.
Well, even stuff like at the beginning, remember when Thufir Hawat, his mentat, remember the guy at the beginning who his eyes kind of go white when he calculates how much it cost? So so they don't have computers. They don't like to rely on computers in the future and AI. So they have people like mentats who essentially are human / biological computing systems. So that you go off to train. It's essentially it's like kind of mental cognitive training where essentially you train your mind to be like, your mind becomes like then a human or biological computer, which again, a failing in the movie. I think not a failing in the movie, but I think something I wish they would have expanded more on because they give little hints about that. But like in the books, it's made a big thing. It was like, we don't trust AI. We don't trust technology. So all these big houses, they have their mentats who specifically are like human computers who help them in tactics, who help them in just like finances and economical stuff. But they're really important in the books. If you have a big house and you're running all these logistics, you need a mentat because you don't have a personal computer because you don't trust computers. So you have this guy who's your human computer who does all that for you.
What I'm basically hearing is that there is enough little details left out from the book in this movie. This movie was 2 hours, 35 minutes. It's like, we might need a 4-hour cut of this movie, and it would be even more satisfying. It would pull me further into this universe here that they've built up.
Well, this is why people say that Dune is impossible to adapt. There's so much stuff going on. There's so many layers. And like Denis Villeneuve did an amazing job. But even Denis Villeneuve, who I consider like, a master filmmaker working today, I think even he stumbled a bit on just like how much to include. Because I think you have to worry about pacing as well, right? Is you don't want to get bogged down in too much exposition and too much world building. You want to have enough to tantalize audiences and enough to get them in there. Like it's like in Star Wars, right? You don't need to know how the lightsaber is made. You don't need to know exactly how the Force works to understand. It's like, lightsabers, big laser sword. I can cut through anything with this Force. I can move stuff with my mind and make people do stuff, right? You don't have to go too deep into that. So maybe it could be a matter of like watching it a couple times to get that sense of the world, or it could just be like, again, Dune just being so difficult to adapt that you just can't capture everything. I don't know.
It's interesting because I think I don't know if there should be an expectation. I think movies and other content should be able to stand on its own.
Absolutely.
But we're living in a world of information, like being so readily accessible that you don't have to. Let me talk about Minecraft for a moment, where I first get into Minecraft and I don't know how to build anything. The game doesn't tell you how to build anything. But guess what? There's millions of people online who are chatting it up and discovering new recipes and stuff. And I can make a little list. And that's what I did. I made a little list on a piece of paper of these different recipes. And it's like, oh, this is a way of interacting with the game, but also with the bigger community and getting help from friends and stuff. It's just like that added to that piece of content. And I think obviously here, books have always had this thing where they're going to have more content in the book. And guess what? We have even more content outside of the books here. And there's all these different forums and communities where you can go in. People are so excited to talk about the universe, everything they've learned about it.
Yeah. Oh, people are excited? Did I give it away?
Well, that's the thing, is like you could go online and say, hey, why was that guy in a vat of goo in this movie, right? And you'll get all sorts of people. They're not talking down to you. Hopefully it's just like a nice open community that will happily explain this thing because they want more people to experience this. Yeah. It's just like, let's keep this Dune thing going.
No, but on the other hand, like I'll be clear, I love this movie. I think Denis Villeneuve knocked it out of the park again. But one of my criticisms of it was, as a fan of the books and having read the book, is like, I think that he struggled a little bit to maybe explain a bit more, make things a bit more clear. And that's just, I think it's just a function of just like being, the book is just, there's so much going on. And there's so many, not just like laterally in terms of like the plot and the narrative and the timeline, but just like in terms of depth and all the themes and all the world building and there's so much going on in Dune. It's so richly layered and so dense.
Man,
every frame is so dense.
Yeah, every frame. Yeah, it's so wild. Can we go talk about this voice again? That the
Oh
Bene
yes,
Gesserit do, and it's
amazing.
just like I love the development of Paul's voice, where it's just like he's kind of starting out, and even when he's failing at doing it, but he's kind of like half doing it. Man, I don't know if you have the whole sound system going on, but like the volume, as watching this with my friend, the volume was cranked up pretty high. Got the 5.1 or whatever, 7.1. It's like that voice was just like it moved through your body. Like it was so the sound design with that was on point.
Okay, yeah. I have to give props to the sound design because like in the books it's just like, oh yeah, we like Jessica or Paul or whoever, they use the voice and people then do what they say. Yeah. And then people like it's really kind of weird, kind of people like have this weird sense of violation afterwards. Like it's like, I can't believe I just did this. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to hand you the glass of water. I didn't want to sit in that chair, but my body did it.
Yeah.
And so like you get this otherworldly sense in the books, but I was like, how do you translate that to the big screen? And so I was like, the sound design for like when they actually use the voice, and I don't have a full 5.1 system. I have a sound bar with a subwoofer, so it's not as great, but I had it cranked as well to get the kind of theater experience. But yeah, like when the voice came, it's like I was sitting like almost over top of the subwoofer, and it's like it shook me and it moved through, and it's like the way it sounded and the volume and everything, and it's like, oh man, it was so amazing. Like the texture of the sounds. Like I don't often talk about, I don't think about sound in terms of texture, but there's like a certain texture to that sound. It was just like unsettling and compelling and engaging all at the same time.
Yeah, like you sort of get a sense what if you received a command from someone doing the voice on you, it's just like you got a sense of it as a viewer of what it sounds like in your head. But that's so basically the Harkonnens capture Paul and his mother, and they're on an ornithopter, bringing them somewhere else, and they've gagged the mother because they know she's a Bene Gesserit with this power, so she can't speak.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, Paul, he's not.
They don't know because the Bene Gesserits are only women. So like, of course, exactly, right? He's just a kid. He can't do anything, and he doesn't have the voice, obviously.
Yeah. And they did this before. We haven't mentioned this. The Atreides have like the secret sign language with their fingers where they're just like, they're quickly moving their fingers. And I love this. The subtitles come up and you're like, oh yeah. So she's able to communicate to her son. It's just like, all right, you got to use this power that's been gifted to you type of thing, right? Like this is within you. You got to develop this right now. And he sort of tries and he fails a little bit, but he does enough that she's able to become ungagged, and then she used the voice in the full power because we've only really heard him use it and he's not fully trained on it, but she is. And my God, that was unsettling. And you see how disturbing it is in the actors. Like what a good job for basically these goons who are just transporting these people. Man, they did such an awesome job of just like, oh my God, she just told me to kill this guy and I don't want to do that, but I'm doing it.
Yeah.
It's just like, and they basically just like, yeah. And at the end, it's just like, oh, you got to just go jump out the end side of this ornithopter. He's just like, oh my God, he just jumps. And it's just like, man, that was really unsettling. It's like, are these Atreides, like are these Bene Gesserit? It's like, these are bad. These could be really bad villains here.
Oh
right?
yeah,
like they have a lot of
books,
power.
they are very kind of behind the scenes, kind of manipulating things. It gets, again, I don't want to spoil too much for people because it gets into, there's a lot of politics that go in the background, and then people find themselves at odds. But their powers too is like, it's kind of cool because it's like it's a learned power, so it's like it's about controlling your voice and controlling your body. But like in the book, the Bene Gesserit literally they have control over their biology. Because like at the beginning, when the Reverend Mother comes and says, you were supposed to give him a daughter, not a son. That was specifically because like they have such control of their bodies that they can control like down to like the giving people like the gender of their children, right? It also comes up later. It's not too much of a spoiler that they can actually control their bodies to the extent that they can extend their lives. And they can slow down the aging process. They don't because they don't want to draw attention to themselves, but they have such control of their biological functions. And part of that training is the voice, right? Where like they have such control of their minds and their bodies that they can control people's other people's actions, and they can control like if they're a woman, is like whether or not to give birth to a male or female child. They don't get. I like too that they put the seeds of all these potential powers, but they don't explore them all right away, right? It's like it's going to be cool in the next movie to see is like all these different powers, because essentially they're like No, the Jedi are like the Bene Gesserit of the Star Wars universe. We'll get it the right way around, I guess.
And it's funny because like our entire lives, we're used to the voice from our Jedis of just like waving the fingers in front of your face and be like, you know, you're going to do this. And it's almost kind of like a joke in the Star Wars movies. It's and the victim of the voice, like the Jedi mind trick, is just like, oh, you know, I'm satisfied doing this. They don't really question. You don't see it in their faces. I mean, most of them are stormtroopers, but you can't see their emotion anyways. They just do it, and you hear a voice be like, oh, yeah, I wanted to do this. They're totally fine with doing it, and they don't think about it afterwards, right? This one, no. It's like these people are going to need therapy after being voiced.
You get the sense of the horror it would be for somebody else to essentially invade your mind and take control of your body. I mean, it's played off like on a sci-fi level, but they go to lengths in the movie as well. I think they did a good job with this, exploring like it's a horrifying thing to have somebody use the voice on you, where it's like you feel it's a complete violation essentially. It was like of your autonomy and your agency and your sense of self, where your body doesn't listen to you anymore. And it's like there's a horror in there, and I think the movie does a good job of capturing that, both in the sound design, the acting, and just like the things that they're having people do to each other, where it's like, this ain't Star Wars. Like there's people slitting throats and there's blood and stuff, right?
It was, I mean, just phenomenal. There's so many phenomenal things. I mean, do we talk about the Fremen people here? I don't think we've mentioned them, but it's like, there's that first interaction with like the Fremen representative
Stilgar
going in front of the Duke. And it was just like, you know, like these guys they know what's going on with their planet, right? They know what's happening. And it's just like, well, here's another guy, and the Duke is like trying to set himself apart from like the previous Harkonnens. It's like, no, we're gonna like work with you. We're gonna make things right for you guys. And it's just like, yeah, okay. And the Fremen like spits on the floor like in front of him. It's just like, oh my goodness, everyone starts flipping out. But it's just like, no, he's giving you his moisture. It's like this is like a cultural thing here. It's just like that is some form of respect and a step in the right direction. It's like this movie wasn't without those moments of humor, which was kind of nice, because something like this,
people could say it was like joyless or humorless. It was like, no, there's like little beats like that. It was like, it wasn't in your face like quippy Marvel humor, but there was still like very human kind of humorous moments like that, right?
Yeah. And then, I mean, we have the humorous sand walk. Okay. Which, I mean, looks like a Monty Python silly walk out in the desert.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I was wondering how they were going to do that in the movie, because in the books, it explains like, because I think in the movie it mentioned it too. It's like if you had any rhythmic sound, it's going to draw the sandworms. So you had to move like in an erratic pattern. So like in the books, it wasn't like a specific moves you did. It was just like you have to walk irregularly, right? You take longer steps.
Walking regularly. It's like the book can get away with not showing that. It just be like, oh, they don't walk like you and I walk with our cadence is a rhythm that is going to attract a giant sandworm that's 400 meters long to eat you.
It was almost like a dance, but yeah, it was, I mean, it is what it is. Like it's funny in the book too, like they mention it and don't really mention it again. It's like they set it up, and it's not really like a big thing in the books, but it's a neat little thing to add to the culture. But also going back to the whole spitting thing, it was also a nice little introduction to show, like for the Fremen people who live in a desert planet where there's very little water, how valuable water is. Well, like because of what they're wearing, the still suits essentially take all your moisture, all your perspiration, and all your other moisture from other parts of your body, everything, and recycles it so you can drink it, because so like to them, water is like the most important, the most valuable thing. So
it's more valuable to them than the spice.
Yeah. So to spit, to share your water, to waste any amount of moisture is like it's seen as a huge, it's a huge gesture.
It was something else.
Yeah.
What else can we talk about that happened in this film? Like any other scenes that sort of popped out to you?
Well, I think so. Building up to it, once Paul and Jessica escape, they go to the desert and they're kind of on the run, and we finally get we see the sandworm come out of the sand, and you get a true sense of the scale. And it's like the design on that creature was amazing. It was everything, like all these moments of seeing Stilgar, of seeing the sandworm, of seeing even that little book with the holographic recording that was mentioned in the book. I was like, how are they going to do that? Seeing all these characters come to like Gurney Halleck and seeing them all come to life. It was a real treat for me as a fan of the books to see like this is even better than I had imagined.
Yeah.
Taking so many cool things, but like when it comes down to it, when the Fremen find them after they've been chased by the worm, they put the thumper in the ground. So the thumpers are a huge thing in the book too, where it like creates that rhythmic sound wave. So the tremors, so the sandworms follow that.
The graboids?
The graboids get so it's secretly a sequel to Tremors.
It makes sense that the graboids would evolve into 400-meter long monsters, right?
It's next stage in evolution. But the Fremen find them and they're just like, man, you're trespassing here. Like we're gonna take you with. I think they said we're gonna take Paul, but like we can train you in our ways or something. You're young enough, you can learn. But like your mother, we're just gonna have to kill her and take her water. So what they do is like. Yeah. I think it's going to be explained later on because they took the body with them at the end of the movie of another individual. But they take the body and they extract all the moisture out of it and they put it into kind of a collective cistern. So like even when you die, they take all the moisture out of the body and it's that valuable, right?
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes sense. That's kind of gross.
But anyway, like they get into that big fight there where like it shows like Jessica she's got the voice, but she's got the moves too. She's got some martial art training where she takes out like Stilgar in the books is like, he is an amazing warrior, right? He's great. And Jessica was able to get the drop on him. And then through a bunch of I won't get too far into it, but essentially Paul meets Chani, who he's been dreaming of, this Fremen girl. And he's like, he sees her and she's like, what are you looking at? It's like, no, nothing. But it's like, she's been dreaming of this person. And all of a sudden this person turns out to be real. And he meets her for the first time. And he's just what do I say? And then he gets into this situation where he's got this honor challenge from one of the people. What is the character's name? Javis, I think.
I couldn't tell you at all.
Yeah, but anyway, it's a one-on-one fight. One thing I wish they would have done, because in the books, what happens is Paul and his opponents, they actually strip down, so essentially just to their underwear. So it's like just like really stripped down. So it's like man to man, person to person kind of battle, everything stripped away. Did you find it?
I've seen Fremen warrior Jamis.
Jamis is the name. I was thinking Jarvis for some reason, but Jamis, yeah. So he gets in this fight with Jamis. Jamis challenges Stilgar's leadership, challenges like Jessica and Paul being there. Paul gets into this one-on-one fight with them, which is like, I can't remember the name of the fight, but it's like, it's a ritualistic fight to the death. And so Paul goes into it and he's having visions potentially of him dying. And he starts fighting this guy, but like the whole background is like, we saw earlier on Gurney Halleck, who was one of the military leaders for House Atreides. He was training Paul. So Paul's been trained how to fight since he was a kid, right? So he's got the moves, and I think it shows when Jamis starts fighting him and he gets the upper hand of Paul, but then Paul's like, his training kicks in, and I think Stilgar turns at one point. It's a humorous moment in the books. Yeah. And in the movie too, is like, he turns to Jessica, is like, is he toying with him?
Because he just looks like, looks like he's outclassed him in every way.
Yeah, this 15-year-old kid is taking on one of their best warriors, and he's like, he asks him, do you yield? And like Stilgar looks like, is he just playing with him? Because he has him dead to rights. And she's like, and Jessica's like, turns to him and is like, no, he's never killed a man before. And he's like, because Stilgar's like, no, this is a fight to the death. Like, there are no other options.
And they're not getting out of this. Yeah. Like, they have to kill each other. It's like in any other movie, any of the other content, it's just like, no, they'd find a way to like, we'll yield and gain respect. It's like, no, there's none of that happening.
Yeah.
You got it.
So this is a really poignant moment where it's like, Paul is all of a sudden is like, this essentially, I understand why that this was a good stopping point for the movie and why they chose this, because essentially this fight with Jamis, this essentially is like what cements Paul on his path towards becoming what he's going to become, which you haven't read the books yet. I don't want to spoil it for you. But like, he eventually does kill Jamis. He wins the respect of the Fremen, and they go off towards the Sietch Tabor, I think they're going to. But then what happens, he's kneeling down, and he's like, Paul, that is, he's leaning over the body of Jamis, and he's kind of in shock because it's the first time he's taken a human life. Yeah. I wish they would have done this too. In the book, he starts crying. He starts crying over it, and people are like, and all the Fremen around us like, well, this is amazing. Like, he's sharing his water with the dead. And it was like this big moment, this big thing where it's like, interesting. Yeah. Cause like, why he's wasting his water? The dead was this big thing because they had this prophecy where they kept talking about, their own chosen one. And then, but in the movie, he doesn't cry. He's like, obviously very distraught, but I thought it would have been a really powerful moment that they was a missed opportunity, I think, where they could have had that, like, again, highlight how important water was and highlight how Paul was on the kind of journey to becoming, he's going to become a leader to the Fremen. I think it's pretty, I don't think that's spoiling anything. I would think that was pretty kind of obvious setup.
Yeah, I mean, that looks, they telegraph that story. It's like, this is his journey. I mean, I think the ultimate journey is like to essentially bring peace to the planet, right?
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it for you. So, yeah, but essentially it's like one of the things around his legend when they get back to the Sietch in the book is like, this guy cried after he killed somebody. So it wasn't like a thing is like, oh, he was like, oh, weak or something. It's like, no, he shared his water with the dead. And then like people are like, what? That's insane. Like this is crazy. This guy's like more than like it was a legend. It was like the beginning of part of his legend, right? So there were some things, and I understand kind of the reason behind some of this stuff, but I really, as a fan of the book, you're always going to be like, oh, I would have put in this, or I would have done that. But it's like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I could have directed a film, any film, as well as Denis Villeneuve, let alone one based on something as complex and as deep and as with such a long history and big fan base as Dune, right?
It's a dangerous undertaking to adapt this thing. I imagine, I don't know. I mean, this is kind of relevant in today's age where you and I think, feel that a lot of fan bases become kind of toxic over time. And it's like, I don't know if it's the fan base or it's just the platform that a very small part of these fan bases get with our social media today. But it's like, I don't know anything about the Dune fan base and how open they are to this stuff, but it's got to be imposing. I mean, these like Dune 1984 recently got a nice 4K release on Ultra HD, and it's just like a lot of people are really interested in this stuff. It's like, all right, there's a lot of people excited for this release. I can just imagine how many people are not buying physical media but are into the Dune universe that are going to be passionate about every single adaptation and comparing it to everything that came before and all the books. What a huge task it was to do this. And just seeing this on screen was just like, wow, this was something else. This was an experience.
It was pretty epic. And I mean, for Denis Villeneuve, who got so much flack for taking on Blade Runner 2049, and that experience to go back into essentially kind of the same kind of arena of putting himself in that situation of facing that kind of criticism from a very loyal fan base. I mean, that takes a certain level of intestinal fortitude, I think, that I don't think I would have had.
Yeah, no, I mean, something like that is terrifying. And like you said, Blade Runner, that was a huge thing to follow. Nobody wanted a Blade Runner sequel.
I didn't want one.
And here we are getting one. And it just, I don't know, for me, I mean, I love Blade Runner, and the Blade Runner 2049 blew my socks off. It was just, it was amazing. It's just like, this is how you do a sequel. And I'm certain that it's because of that. Not necessarily the box office performance of Blade Runner 2049, but how well constructed and the full of artistry that movie was, and how well received it was by that loyal fan base is why Villeneuve was able to do a Dune adaptation. It's like, in his hands, we can expect some good things. And I think he's going to do a lot of, not necessarily the negative fan service, but like he is going to treat the original source material with the respect it needs to satisfy those loyal fans and bring in new people and give us a really solid movie. And not just one movie, two of them. Yeah. There's a lot of expectation on part 2 now.
Yeah.
All right. So we've come this far.
But Brian, this is only the beginning.
This is only the beginning.
What a way to end the movie.
Right? Oh man, it was wild. Like, what is your star rating of this film?
I knew you were going to ask, and I just watched it on Friday, I think, and this is a Sunday, so it's been a couple of days kind of ruminating, and I'm kind of torn between either a 4 or a 4.5 out of 5.
Yeah.
With obviously, I'm going to have the heart, the like on Letterboxd as well. But I was thinking about in terms of, a couple areas where I thought the movie could have been improved in terms of like translating the book. And then just in terms of Denis Villeneuve's other filmography and kind of what I rated his other stuff at and where I found Dune kind of fitting in upon first viewing. But yeah, somewhere I'm torn between somewhere in the 4 to 4.5 star rating. It's not perfect. Not, I don't think it's his best movie. I think for me, his top trilogy is still going to be Arrival, Prisoners, and Enemy. I think are his top movies for me.
What brings it down from 5 stars for you? Like, is there any specific element in the movie, or is it just kind of a feeling?
I think in terms of what we talked about, there's a few things where I think there were some kind of missing explanations in terms of the world building that could have been done a bit better. I think the pacing of, I'm going to say I'm saying it's, even though the pacing seems slow, they cut out a couple, I think, crucial scenes that would have really helped build up Duke Leto's backstory and House Atreides' backstory, and just put a little bit more of that, because he was really building up, starting to build up a relationship with the Fremen, and the Fremen were starting to see him in a different way. I think, again, 4.5 is really good, but it's just, there was a few things. And again, I think what we're talking about, where even someone like me who's read the book, someone like me, no, but even as a fan of the books, I've read the books, I know what's going to happen next. But I think like you said, and like a lot of people have said, yeah, it feels like part of the story. So once the second movie is released, it might bring that rating up, as weird as that is. But for me, like, it's the same thing as like watching Batman Begins without watching the rest of it. I think The Dark Knight actually increased my rating on Batman Begins.
Yeah, exactly. There's payoff to be had there.
Yeah, so I think once you see the whole story together, because this is really telling the first part of the first book, and so I'm really struggling because I really love the movie. I really love how it was constructed in terms of the cinematography, in terms of all the actors were amazing. Everything was shot beautifully. The set design, the costume design, everything was like people were kind of making fun of it before. It was like, tones of gray and tones of beige. Yeah. But it's like it was so vibrant, even in the desert, even with those kind of more subdued tones. But something, it just didn't, it wasn't quite a 5-star for me.
Yeah. No, that's pretty fair. I think you have some good things to say there. For me, this is 4 stars right out of the gate.
Right.
Definitely does not deserve anything lower than 4 stars. Yeah. I really struggled to give it anything more at this point because it is, I definitely felt the jarring finish to a first part, and it felt a little anticlimactic, right? But I think you touched on it there, where once we have the second part available, it's going to elevate this up. And I look forward to giving this 5 stars in the future, honestly. Like, there was so much good stuff. I mean, everything on screen was great. The music, I think, was Hans Zimmer score.
Yeah, amazing music.
Absolutely spot on. This guy can do no wrong. Villeneuve, he's just on fire with sci-fi, and I love seeing big screen sci-fi that lets you soak in these scenes and everything. It's just, I love seeing the tech. I love seeing this world unfold. And I only read the first few chapters of the book, which was basically the hand in the box scene and a little bit of that. I was so lost during that part of the book. Is like, okay, I look forward to reading the book now with the mental image of the characters and honestly the pronunciations of their names in my head. And it's like, I think I'm going to really enjoy reading the rest of the book, having seen the movie here. And I'm not really one to get upset when they remove stuff out of books. It's like, it's just this thing. It's like, I'm fully aware of the business side of it and the artistic side of it, of creating its own piece of content, like its own entity. This movie has to stand on its own to some degree. And I think it does it in a pretty spectacular fashion. I was really entranced with every moment. I mean, it was a lengthy 2.5 hour film, but it didn't feel that long at all. I would love to see a longer cut of this thing, honestly, that maybe gave a little more explanation into the world, but man, it was on fire the entire time.
I think one of the other things too is because of the epic scale of this thing, that's going to take me a couple of viewings really to kind of soak everything in, because there was so much going on. Even though the plot wasn't like super zippy, it didn't seem like a whole lot going on. There's so many layers and so much going on, and just the epic scale, just to be able to like soak it all in and absorb it all. I think it's going to take a couple of viewings just to kind of figure out what the rating is going to be, right?
The other thing for me is that I find a lot of Villeneuve movies are very emotionally engaging. I didn't really get that out of Dune. Like, and that might be because it's only, part one of a 2-parter, right? Like, this is not a complete movie. But like, I'm thinking of something like Arrival, and just like how emotionally invested I get in that movie. Prisoners, It was just this so engaging of at level. Like, this guy can do a lot of great stuff, but yeah, I was kind of missing that emotional punch.
Yeah, no, a little. I can see that too. Whereas like you compare that to something like Arrival, where it's like, yeah, you're tearing up by the end, and this one seems a little bit more emotionally detached. But I think that part 2 is really gonna show what this story is capable of, and what Denis Villeneuve is his overall vision. I think is gonna really knock people's socks off.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. Thank you for listening and hanging out with us today. We really appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us for the next episode. We can be found around the internet and social media, with our home base being realfilmchronicles.com, which will have all the links you need to follow and keep in touch with us. If you have a moment, we'd really appreciate if you could leave some feedback, such as a rating on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you're listening on. And feel free to send us an email to realfilmchronicles@outlook.com. We love some suggestions, questions, or general comments, and would enjoy including them on an upcoming episode. Until next time, take care of yourself and others, and keep your film journey going.